Hey everyone, welcome to another Angry Artist podcast. The previous few podcasts, I talk about the ideas and motivation and such, but this particular question is going to be more technical. So somebody on Deviantart, username Gildesuka, I hope I pronounced that right, asked, is there a way to color grayscale without being bored to hell and getting a dull picture in the end? Working with a grayscale has big advantages for perfecting composition and lighting, but coloring it is so boring to me and the transitions look gray and dull. I might be doing something wrong. How would you do it? Thank you very much for the question. I wanted to answer this because over the years of doing art, seriously, I've read this question a multitude of times in forums such as concept art and even sometimes in some of the anime forums I've been on when I was younger. The idea to use a grayscale before transitioning into a colored piece of work has been something that a lot of people have taught other artists to do. And there is something fundamentally very good with that. Values, or the black and white of a piece, is important because most artists start off not being able to control the black and white. There's a lot of grayscale pieces that end up being very chaotic. It doesn't show the right focal points, and usually the grayscales will solve those problems. You'll get the lighting, you'll get the focal points, you'll get the secondary focal points, and you'll get the framing and all those compositional tools. Now, the transition from that into color is very important. Most artwork nowadays are going to be colorful. You're going to want some colors, and it just tends to look incomplete without color. Now, of course, it's barring exceptions. If you're trying to do a noir scene and such, grayscale is completely fine. So, how do you do it? So, over the years, I've tried literally everything. I've tried to use filters, I've tried to just paint over it. I've tried everything. And trust me, I've played with Photoshop long enough to have tried every single possible thing. Not bragging, of course. Just want to mention that you don't have to go through this as well. So, as I got more experienced, I realized something very important. And it's the idea that color is relative to each other. This means that your perception of judging what you do next in an artwork must be done in context with what you've placed previously. So why is that important? It's important because we gotta understand, with a grayscale, you're already putting something down on the canvas. You're putting just black and white. Now, where the heck do you start coloring from a grayscale piece? Because of the fact that your first step is to create a grayscale, every judgment you make afterwards is relative to your grayscale. Now, a lot of artists will disagree with me, and I'm sure there's some processes that will work for some artists. But I figured out that there is no possible way to optimize your coloring if you start off with your grayscale. This is, of course, because you're building on top of what's already established without taking into context the power of the colors you're putting down. Grayscale is one way of seeing a composition. It's possibly the most important way, but it's not everything. A piece that doesn't work grayscale can work in color and vice versa, simply because the weight of colors are completely different from the weight of values. I used to think having a good grayscale means that you will have the perfect piece. But as I did more artwork and as years went by, I realized that is simply not the case. You can screw up a piece that has a great grayscale because once you start putting it in color, it doesn't work. So my advice to transition from grayscale to color is gonna start sounding like I'm dodging the question. But I feel like in order to do that, you need to start off with coloring. Grayscale is a fantastic tool to see things in values. And of course, as I said before, values are one big, massive step towards understanding colors. Values are only one side of coloring. The other being the hue, which is the red, blue, green, etc., as well as the saturation, which is the intensity of that hue. To create a composition neglecting two of the three things that make up a color is only going to cause headaches when you transition into the full spectrum. The balancing of the elements in your piece will be skewed as you add colors because, again, colors will add a different weight than just having pure black and white. Now, you've mentioned that coloring from grayscale is boring, and I don't really know how to answer that, other than to find a process that works for you. Now, there is one way I would sort of recommend if you were to really want to go from grayscale to coloring, and that's to put some sort of overlay layer on top of your entire piece in order to create a frame of reference for your entire composition. Now, putting colors on individual parts when you're going from grayscale to coloring is not going to work because, again, your perception of how the color will look is going to be relative to the grayscale. So the only way you can do so is if you color the entire piece in some sort of mood or atmospheric color before you move on into coloring the rest of the piece. If you don't do that, you risk making your transitions look gray and dull, as you said in your question. And of course, that is because any color you put down on a grayscale is going to look saturated, it's going to look colorful, because it's literally comparing 0 to 1. 0 meaning it's just grayscale, and then you put any color, any freaking color, and it's going to look right. Or it's going to look saturated, I mean. So, the only way is to color the entire piece first, and then add individual colors on top of that. Painting is just a process of making decisions. When you create problems that will skew the questions that you ask, then it starts not working at all. So again, use Grayscale as a learning tool, but beyond that, I've largely got out of using Grayscale 2 colors because I too found it way too difficult to do. It's not that it's impossible for me, it just feels like I'm holding myself back if I do that, and it kind of doesn't let me make judgments on color from step one. Rather, I'm sort of making decisions based on grayscales. And of course, if grayscale is not going to be the final result, then you're just going to make it harder and longer for you to create your final piece. I hope that answers this question. I know it seemed a little bit off tangent, but I completely understand what you mean. Every starting artist for sure should start with grayscale because they need to learn to see things from perspective that they generally won't see it, and that's seeing the grayscale from a colorful piece. Once you master grayscale, most people will be able to just put down colors and they'll subconsciously have a great value composition as well. I would recommend just going straight into color and be confident that your lighting will work. If values are still a problem, then just go back to doing a few more grayscale paintings and really understand it, and then just working into colors again. A way master fine artists do it is they might do a grayscale, but they add a little bit of burnt sienna or something that will shift the temperature to what they want as a final result. So they're still working with basic values by simplified coloring, but they make sure that they're not using pure gray so that when they're actually creating color decisions afterwards, it's according to the temperature established already. I hope that makes sense. It's really a problem that can be solved just by experimenting and make it your own individual process. Of course, if something is boring, then that's something you have to ask yourself whether it's working for you or not. Anyways, I hope that answered the question. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.